Lieutenant Colonel Francis E. Babe Hawke. We're now in the European theater, and going to talk about the times that you had to land, let's say, under duress. So the first time, do you recall what the mission was?
No, I don't. I don't.
And
I think it was Kralupy, though.
Kralupy?
Czechoslovakia.
What would the target have been in that case?
It was a oil refinery.
Okay. Had you hit that before?
No, had not.
This was a new target?
Mm-hmm.
What happened? How far into the mission were you when you took the flak?
Well, we we completed the mission. We actually bombed the target, and we were hit going in, and then we were hit coming out. And that's when we realized that we weren't going to make it back, because we had an engine out, and they'd shot out our brakes, flaps, and so forth.
Did you take casualties?
Yeah, we had 2 casualties, 2 waist gunners.
Killed?
Yes.
Did they die in the plane?
Yes.
Now, tell me, how did what were the conversations like? Once, who made the decision that you couldn't go back, and then
The pilot made that decision. Lydia.
the pilot made the decision that
Yeah, we wouldn't make it. Yeah.
And then what was the discussion like in the plane? I mean, how did that go?
There was a discussion on the first thing was should we bail out, and because of the 2 guys that were wounded, they didn't die right away. We decided to go on and try to make it back. And then when we couldn't and had to crash land, in the meantime the 2 crewmen had died just before we crashed.
And did the pilot find? The airplane was under control.
Yes.
And so the pilot had to find. Were there landing sites that you were aware of before the mission that you knew about, or did he just have to find an open spot?
We had to find an open spot. The area that we were in, there were no emergency landing type fields.
So he finds an open spot. This is again behind German lines, correct?
Well, yeah, there were no German lines as such. It was pocket type of enemy, and they would take over an airfield, let's say the Germans would, and then the Yugoslavs would kick them out when they needed the airfield, and then give it back to the Germans to maintain it. So there were no front lines in Yugoslavia.
So the plane goes down.
And when we went down, of course, there was a tremendous amount of dust and the tremendous amount of oil all over the airplane, especially the wing. And when the airplane is flat on its stomach like that, there's very few ways you can get out. The main way is, of course, out the side windows that the gunners were in, and the other way in this case was out the top of the airplane. And for those of us in front, we went out through the top and then slid down. And of course, it's a high wing, so there wasn't much of a distance to get down to the wing, but the trouble was the wing had oil all over it, and we all slipped off of the wing, and that's when I hurt my back.
Oh, really? And did you take the 2 guys who had been killed, did you remove them from the airplane?
No, we left them in the airplane and set the airplane on fire.
What was going through your mind? For the time that you got hit and found out you were going to have to go down with the plane, until you got out of the airplane, what was going through your mind?
Well, it was to get away from the airplane, but also to take as much gear as we could with us, but we couldn't take things like the bomb sight. And that's the reason we burned the airplane, so that the enemy wouldn't get that. But we took all of the food that we had on the airplane, all the extra water and that type of stuff. And then we shot a Sperry gun into the airplane, which ignited the fuel and the oil.
I don't know if you're covering the microphone there or not.
Oh, no, I wasn't.
But I mean, what was going through your mind in terms of, for example, when you were going down as the navigator, was there anything for you to do? Probably not.
Yeah, try to determine where we were so we could figure out which way to go when we got on the ground. And I took the maps of the area with me so that we could have a route, the best way to go, which was south, of course, and head for the coast.
Fear?
Yes, there was fear.
No.
But we're too busy to be real scared. It was after that was all over and we were walking away that fear overtook us.
Now, I imagine there were standard operating procedures for this kind of thing in terms of destroying
Oh yeah,
plane and that sort of thing.
yeah, and we had made calls too to let them know that we were going down and the position that we were going down. What time of the year was this? This was in the spring,
Okay. Early spring? What month?
March.
March. Okay, so it's still pretty cold.
Yeah, it was cold.
So you're out of the plane, you're on the ground, you've set it on fire. Now what's the discussion?
Well, the discussion is which way to go. And of course I had the maps and I said, well, we've got to go this way because the other way is where the enemy is. So we had to go south.
Now this kind of situation does the chain of command still hold, or does a different decision-making methodology?
No, I imagine it would depend upon the crew, but in this case the aircraft commander was in charge and he made the decisions. He would ask different people what we ought to do. So he took a consensus, and we all had the same consensus that we wanted to walk out and escape.
Who was the aircraft commander? Do you remember?
I don't even remember his name. I was on a lead crew, so I don't remember who he was.
And your back is hurt at this point.
Yes,
Are you in a lot of pain?
No, not an awful lot of pain at that time, no.
How about the others? Were they injured?
Only as far as getting out of the airplane is concerned, some sprained ankles and stuff like that.
And the oil on the wing was due to the engine that had been shot out?
Well, and when you crash, the oil tanks burst. Each engine had oil.
And the bomb site that you wanted to make sure didn't get in enemy hands was the Norden bomb site?
Yes.
That was considered quite advanced at that time?
Yes.
So you head south. What kind of terrain was it?
Very rocky and open. And we were to the east of the mountains.
Like, can you pinpoint the location just a little more? Where exactly you were?
Yeah, we were actually south of Zara, Yugoslavia, and which was on the coast. And we were south of that, heading south.
So tell me, what was the routine? What'd you do?
Well, we walked as far as we could. Then we decided that it would be better to find a place to hide and then walk at night. So we just found a place in mostly rocks. And we thought we were hiding, and we were just waiting for nighttime to walk, and that's what we did. We waited till night to walk, and then the 2 days later, as we were getting settled to rest, why that's when the partisans picked us up.
Now, do you know how close you were to any Germans at that time when you crashed?
No, did not know. The Germans, we did not know where the Germans were at all. We just knew that they were further north, northern part.
So were you concerned that you might run into Germans?
Oh yes, very, very concerned.
I guess that's why you were trying to hide.
Hmm.
So as you're settling in, you say the second night or the third night?
It was the second night.
Tell me what happened then.
Well, we had settled down, and about 12 partisans showed up and circled us, and they all had machine guns. And as we settled down, why, I was, I guess, the first one to notice them, and I punched the aircraft commander and said, "We got visitors," and he reached for his gun, and I said, "No, you don't want to do that." They have Tommy submachine guns, and they were partisans, and they were in kind of a British type uniform, but they had a red star on their hats. So they took us captive.
And they relieved you of what at that point?
They took everything. They took our flying boots. They took our guns, our watches, anything that they could take. They took.
They made you walk without boots, or they took your boots after you got where you were going?
Well, we had shoes on
okay.
inside the boots. They just took the boots.
Okay. And did any of them speak English?
No, not a one spoke English. We didn't reach anybody that spoke English until we got to this little town where they took us.
And how far a walk was that?
It was just a day's walk.
So did they wait for the next day before you started walking, or did they start you walking?
No, they started. It was in the morning that they picked us up, and they started walking us immediately further south.
How did they treat you at that from the very beginning? How did they treat you?
They treated as if we were enemy.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that because they thought you might not be Americans, or,
Right.
or they considered the Americans the enemy?
No, they thought we might be Germans.
Trying to infiltrate?
Yeah.
They tried to speak to you in German or any
No,
language?
they didn't speak anything but Yugoslav.
So they just used kind of sign language to tell you what they wanted?
Yeah, and they poked us with guns and
Really?
told us which way to go.
So they were kind of aggressive and threatening?
Yes.
Even after you were disarmed?
Oh yeah.
And did you walk basically single file? Or?
Yes. No, we walked two side by side.
And at that point, what were you thinking?
We were thinking, well, we were going to be taken captive and imprisoned, as we didn't know who they were. But they took us to this village, and they put us in a barn-like structure. There was straw on the floor, and they made us sit down, and they brought us some soup, and it was potato soup, and we ate that. And then they just told us to wait. And so later on that afternoon, a OSS captain showed up. Of course, he spoke English, and he told us that he was get us out of there in a couple of days, which he did.
Now, how did he authenticate you?
Oh, he could tell we were Americans just by our uniforms and talking to us.
Right. And do you recall his name?
Yeah, it was.
Stampedos?
Yeah, Stampedos.
And he was there because of his own ethnic background and ability to speak language? Or?
Yeah, he was a big guy, and he looked like one of them because he wore that uniform and he had a long mustache. But he was much bigger than they were. And the only other person that was big was a female officer, and she was quite large compared to the partisans.
And she was a local, or was she also an OSS officer?
No. She was Yugoslav.
So they take you back to. Do you remember the name of the town?
No, it wasn't a town. It was just like a village where they grew stuff. We were in a barn.
So they show up at this barn. They put you in the barn, and then at what point does Stampedo show up?
He showed up the next day and said that he would get us out of there. We just had to have patience, and that he had another crew that was down, and he was going to bring that crew. So when he brought that crew, then we walked to an open area where C-47 came and picked us up. It was piloted by British officers.
Mm-hmm.
So we got on the C-47 and flew back. It was just across the Adriatic, which is only about 50 miles wide at that point.
So, and did they take everything? Did they return anything to you?
No, we asked for it back, and the captain said no. He said, that's Lend-Lease. That's the word he used. He says, it's Lend-Lease.
And that basically was his job, to work with partisans to get air crews out?
Yes,
So it was
exactly.
sort of a routine?
Yeah, he'd been there about 2 years. He'd gotten out himself several times and went back and took a bath and came back.
So this was kind of a standard sort of underground railroad that was in place?
Yes, exactly.
Now, before you crashed, were you aware that that existed?
No, no.
Really? So you hadn't run any crews or weren't aware that this was
No.
this was something that existed in case you went down?
No. So when we got back to Italy, it was down at Bari. They took us to Bari, Italy, to the hospital, and they cleaned us up, and we went then back to our base. We were there only overnight. They just wanted to check on us.
Right. But you were in the farmhouse for 2 days
Yeah.
before the other crew showed up?
Yeah.
So the airfield that that they came in to take you out of, was that under partisan control?
Yes, and it was just a dirt strip.
So, and other than your back, were you injured in any other way?
No, no.
Did you have your back checked?
When I got to the hospital, yeah.
And what was the conclusion?
Oh, you have a bad back. Get back to your outfit and go fly again.
Or was it a disc, a pulled muscle, or a vertebrae?
It was just pulled back, and it was an extension of what I had done earlier when I was a young man.
Okay. And so, what number mission was this for you?
This was the 15th mission.
15th mission.
Yeah.
And what sort of sidearm did you carry?
Army 45 in a shoulder holster.
And everyone had one?
Oh yeah.
Any other weapons?
No, that's all.
So everybody surrendered their 45s to the partisans?
Naturally.
Their boots?
When you had a submachine gun pointed at you, and there's 12 of them.
You do whatever you're told.
Yeah.
Now, did you get another 45?
Yes. We got.
Did they ask you what happened to the old one?
Oh yeah, we had to get it all signed off, and the captain told us that we'd have no trouble getting a statement of charges released.
Now you go back and what percentage of airplanes went down? I mean, how unusual was this? When you went back, were people going, wow, hail the returning heroes, or was like, oh, okay, here comes another group?
Yeah, it was more or less that way.
Here comes another group.
Where you guys been,
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you must have some great stories to tell. I mean, you must have the best stories for a couple of days.
Oh yeah, but they put us right back to work.
Really?
Mm-hmm. That was the best thing for us too.
Yeah. Now, what was did it change your whole outlook on things, though?
Well, yeah, it made us more aware of where we were all the time, so that if it happened again, we might do some things differently to get closer to the coast, or get closer to a base that was designated for landing instead of crash landing.
But they hadn't trained you on that before, ahead of time?
No, not really. Later on the second time we went down, was that we landed actually at one of these bases, which had been taken over from the Germans, and all they had was tents, and they had gasoline in barrels, 50-gallon barrels, and we had to pump that into the wing tanks, and that took quite a while. But we got off the next day.
Okay, so which mission was that? The second time?
That was the 17th mission.
So just 2 missions later?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a week later, 2 weeks later?
Yeah.
Oh no. So again, was this flak?
Well, this was flak that had actually punctured the oil tanks in the aircraft, and we leaked oil, and we had to replace the lines, the oil lines, and we got that done there and took off the next day.
So it's just, okay. But at some point, didn't you get frostbite?
Yeah, I got frostbite on the first time we went down.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then, didn't they put you in the hospital?
Yeah, put me in the hospital, and they were going to amputate the fingers, and that's when I left.
You took off?
Took off. Hitchhiked back.
Well, where was the hospital?
Down at Bari, Italy.
And you hitchhiked back to Cerignola?
Yeah, which wasn't far.
So that you basically ran off
I ran off, yeah.
because you didn't want your fingers amputated.
No, I didn't want them. They were kind of brownish, and,
Uh-huh. They were going to do it the next day, or?
they were going to do it the next day, and I wasn't there.
Well, was there a report sent out looking for you?
No, it never did. They, I guess they just figured I went back to the unit, which I had.
Okay. But you said at one point you were in the hospital with, there were two guys on beds on either side of you.
Yeah, well, there were two guys in the two beds next to me, and they were had what do you call it when they put plaster on you? Casts. And the guy came by and took our names and said they were going to give us the Purple Heart, and I said no. I said I don't want to. I later learned that these two guys had been in a Jeep accident, but they got a Purple Heart for it.
But seeing them so badly hurt kind of made you feel like you didn't deserve one?
Oh, I know. Not with two guys dead. And kind of silly.
So you would turn down your Purple Heart.
Yeah. Well, I didn't deserve one.
Now, in the first incident, did they talk about different ways of getting you out before they decided to go the route of the airfield?
No, that was the only way to get out, except they said just in case they couldn't get an airplane, they would take us by cart down to the Adriatic and get us out by ship, boat. And so they took pictures of us, and they had the same clothes. So one guy would put on a white shirt, and the other guy would put on a white shirt and a tie, and another guy would put on a coat and white shirt, or a coat and tie. And they took our pictures. They were called escape photos.
Well, they were for the purpose of creating false ID?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is your escape photo.
Right.
Why don't you hold that up there?
Oh, what a handsome fella. I had hair then.
Let's see, keep it there.
Used to be much darker than that. It's faded.
Yeah. Okay. So that was your 17th mission.
I was 15th mission.
I mean, the 17th was your second time.
Yeah.
And that was just basically taking flak that caused you.
Being forced down before we could get back to Italy, and
that was
getting the aircraft repaired and getting out the next day.
And then how many more missions before you were done?
I had 6 more missions after that.
So you had a total of 23 missions. And the next 6 missions just basically went off without a hitch?
Without any problems, except we did get flak, and you always got flak.
Now tell me how it wound down. How did the war end for you?
Well, what happened was the Americans and the British were coming in from the west, and the Russians were coming in from the east, so that there was a very narrow area which we could bomb, or otherwise we'd be hitting the friendly areas. So then we went into a case of bombing northern Italy. And so we hit the front lines, and what we did was they put the whole wing up, and we were in side by side, and we came up to the front lines, and they had put smoke pots out so we could identify where they were, so we could drop over that, and we dropped our bombs that way. It was called Fearless Fosdick, and that was one of the last missions. And then from then on, our missions were over then. Then what we would do is we would fly goods up to the military up in the Udine area and land on grass up there and take the food and stuff off and take off and go back and get another load and bring it. Mm-hmm.
So on these would basically be missions. You're totally in friendly airspace.
Right. But we didn't get credit for those.
Okay. So that was after number 23.
Yeah. That was before the war was over. Mm-hmm.
Right, but after number 23.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you said Fearless Fosdick. Who were you bombing? Were you actually bombing the German lines?
German lines. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
they didn't want us to bomb the American and British, so they set up smoke pots, and then they had people on the ground, forward observers, who talked to us, so that they would see the airplanes and they'd say, well, you're still 5-6 miles from dropping, but they had these smokes, so we knew exactly where we shouldn't drop. And we all just dropped at the same time, right along the line. Very devastating.
Yeah, but you couldn't actually see your target. You were just told where to drop.
No, but we weren't very high. We were about 8 or 10,000 feet, I think, is all.
And there was no flak?
No, not there.
Because you were too close to the line.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So you participated in Fearless Fosdick?
Mm-hmm. Which was two or 3 days. Uh-huh.
So there's 2 or 3 days of constant going out, coming back, refueling, reloading,
yeah.
Going out, coming back. Yeah. Was it all at the daytime?
Yeah, it was all daytime. That's the only time you could identify the front lines. Mm-hmm.
So after mission 23, then it becomes basically supply missions?
Yeah, right.
And
that was, we would fly this stuff up to the Udine, and as I say, we landed on grass, and it would be one airplane after the other, and we'd go down at the end and kick the stuff out of the bomb bay and turn around and take off. So I think it was the second time we kicked the crate off, and it busted open, and it was cans of bacon. Mm-hmm. Well, we hadn't had any meat for almost a year, so we loaded some of that back on. And another crate we kicked off was fruit. What was it?
Cocktail?
Yeah, fruit cocktail. So we loaded some of that back on too, because we hadn't had that. We hadn't had any of that. And I remember on the bacon, we fried it in our helmet on the stove, and of course that wasn't the greatest thing in the world, and it was real salty. So the next batch, we soaked it for about 4 hours in water, and then fried it. But it was good. It was good. We hadn't had any bacon the whole time I was over there.
So on these supply missions, you started checking out what was in the crate before you kicked them out?
Yeah. No, we kicked them out to make sure they're busted open.
And so how did it wind down for you?
Well, those were the last times we really flew, and then we started getting rumors about what was going to happen next, and it came down that we were going to fly out of there. Mm-hmm. And so they assigned us an airplane, and we got it ready and took off, and that's when we left, and we flew from there to Marrakesh, Africa. Mm-hmm. And then from Marrakesh we flew on down to Dakar, Senegalese, Africa, which was on the hump. Mm-hmm. From there we then flew across the Atlantic to Natal, Brazil, and that we crossed the 0 point. What am I trying to say? Equator. We crossed the equator there, and then from there we flew north, and we flew over the Amazon, the Delta, and it was about almost 20 miles wide. It was a beautiful sight to see. We went up to Borinquen Field, and then from there we went into Charleston, North Carolina.
Which field?
Borinquen Field, Puerto Rico.
Oh, Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how did they decide who exited the theater when? Was there some sort of, what?
Well, they wanted to get all the airplanes out, so every crew that was capable was able to get out by air. Otherwise, they'd have to go out by boat, and that way the aircraft would have to stay there, and they'd have to destroy them or something. So any aircraft that would fly while they left. Some friends of mine that were there down in a different bomb group, they went home by boat.
So, and was this after VE Day, before VE Day?
No, it was after VE Day. Yeah.
After the surrender.
Yeah.
Okay. And was there some sort of system to decide who got out before others?
No, just as soon as we got the airplane ready, we got our orders and we took off.
I thought you'd mentioned before a point system or something.
Well, no, it didn't have anything to do with points at all. They just picked crews, and the crew that I went over with, I came back with.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
You hadn't seen them for a while.
Oh yeah, we were in the same tent all the time.
Oh, okay, but you hadn't been flying.
No, I hadn't been flying. I'd been flying lead.
That must have been nice to be
Oh,
with
yeah.
the old boys again. They had all survived.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Let's see. We went all of the airmen went over as corporals, and they all got promoted to at least staff, except for the engineer and the radio operator, and they got promoted to tech sergeant. The other officer, the other two officers, Drifter was the pilot. He was promoted to first lieutenant, as was I, but the co-pilot was not promoted.
Really?
He was still a second lieutenant, yeah. Because he only flew 10 missions.
Oh, he was the one who won 10 missions. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you had gone through OCS.
Pardon?
You had gone through OCS.
No. I went through navigation school. That's how I got commissioned.
Okay, that's what I thought, because OCS is later for you. Or did you ever go through OCS?
No. I got commissioned out of flying school.
Oh, okay.
And I went as a PFC to Hondo, and I came out as a second lieutenant,
Oh, okay.
as a navigator.
Okay. With regard to the war, anything else that hasn't been covered or that you think is important we haven't talked about?
I can't think of anything. It was what everybody else was doing, so you didn't think you were doing anything special. And I think that's the way most military men felt, on the ground and in the air, that everybody else was doing it. So there wasn't anything special. It was a job to do, and we enjoyed doing it.
It's interesting that you enjoyed doing it.
Pardon?
You had a great sense of accomplishment. And,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
mixed in with a good dose of fear, I imagine.
Yeah, when you take a look at your strike photos and see that you hit your target, it made you very proud.
What was the relationship between the guys who went up in the airplanes and the guys on the ground who took care of the airplanes and got them ready to go?
Well, it was you had several people. You had the people that took care of the aircraft. By that I mean the engines and fixing up the holes in the airplane, and the hydraulics people and that type. And they took care of your airplane. And they may take care of a couple other airplanes too, depending upon what their specialty was. But you had a crew chief, and he only took care of that airplane.
Okay.
And then you had your armorers, the guys that came out with the bombs and the ammunition and loaded those into the airplanes. So there were a lot of people involved in getting ready for a mission.
And was there kind of an esprit de corps, or sort of a team sense?
Not so much, because when you got out the airplane, you were busy getting on the airplane and getting ready to go. The pilot, of course, made a walk around with the co-pilot, so they had more contact with the crew chief than we did.
And when you were in the theater, was there a sense that a lot of guys weren't coming back, or was it a pretty small minority that weren't coming back? I mean, did you feel like you had a good shot at making it through?
Yeah, you didn't really think about that too much, except when you start getting flak, you thought about it. But usually when you were getting flak was at the most important time of the mission, and that was to get the bombs on the target. So it was when you came off of the target that you started getting the flak, that you kind of got scared, you know. But up to that point, you were too busy.
And did you learn the results of each mission?
Yes, yes. When we got back, we didn't learn immediately, but we did later on in debriefings. But part of our debriefing, of course, was intelligence, and we would tell them where we thought the bombs hit, and that was one of my jobs, was to mark it on the map where the target was and where we thought the bombs actually hit, because we could see them unless there was cloud cover.
Mm-hmm. And of the 23 missions, how many of them would you say you hit your target?
I would say 20 times.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very high percentage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was that pretty average? Would you say all the crews were that good?
Yeah. The actual target, okay, let's say it was a marshalling yard. Mm-hmm. You may miss that, but you would probably hit the tracks or something right next to it. Mm-hmm. So you could pretty well tell that you had a pretty good chance that your mission was a success.
Mm-hmm. And that bomb sight was pretty good?
Yeah, it was pretty good. The CEP, circular error probability, was quite high. In other words, you did not pinpoint your target that much. You may be as much as a mile off or 5 miles off, and you'd have to, as a result of that, they would schedule that target again. Mm-hmm.
And on your average rate, what kind of ordnance would you be carrying?
We'd be carrying 1,000-pound bombs usually, 500 and 1,000-pound bombs.
And how many of those would you have?
Oh gosh, I forget how many there were.
Okay.
But there were a lot.